So I hope that everyone is doing well. We're finally over kind of the horrible part of winter and we can start enjoying more of the Texas spring, which starts fairly early down here. So my sympathies for those of you who've been in the field like I have for the past month, getting weather whiplash. It's not over though. So. Okay, so everyone, welcome to our March 13 meeting of the North Texas Archaeological Society here in Fort Worth. I'd like to also extend a welcome to our new members since our February meeting. 5 new people have joined NTAS. Welcome, and we look forward to seeing more of you guys here. This is also a reminder that NTAS memberships renewal is coming up, deadline in a couple days. So the grace period is almost over. Okay, get rid of this. Sorry about that, guys.
Great stuff here.
Maybe sharing.
Yeah. Okay, anyways, it was just showing too much of the screen. Anyways. Also, but as in terms of our memberships go, we offer free memberships to students, so it's a very easy application process. We do offer scholarships for you who want to join and maybe don't have a quick $20. A quick review of the programs we got going on for the next month and some change. You guys just missed this past weekend our Joe Reed work site, but we'll still have that going on next month. For the remainder of March, we also have the SMU Lab Days. And despite there being a cattle conference and East Texas conference the same weekend, apparently turnout at SMU was extremely good this last time. And it sounds like everyone had quite a lot of fun. Just a reminder, the majority of the collections that they're processing at SMU have to do with some field schools in Kirk County that TAS conducted. So it's all really exciting artifacts and discoveries and stuff that really desperately needs rehabilitation. So if that's something you're interested in, please get involved. I've been getting a lot of emails lately from young people, particularly students, wanting to volunteer somehow. And the laboratory is a nice place to start. It's a very relaxing environment. In April, we got a request from the Council of Texas Archeologists to join them at the Southwest Cattle Raisers Convention. This is a public outreach opportunity. So instead of playing with artifacts or an archaeological site, we're doing a little more public outreach with basically local landowners, people who potentially could have archaeological sites on their land. So a couple of us will be there alongside CTA, but we certainly want to see more people. It's a 2-day event. It's all day long. It's something between like 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. So really, if you've got an itch to do some outreach, this is a really good opportunity. You'll have lots of support. They'll have brochures, they'll have presentation stuff. You just come hang out at the table and really just talk to people, normal Texans, fun stuff. So you can email Eric or you can email info@ntxas.org if you want to get involved. Those are the old dates for SMU Lab Days, but SMU Lab Days continues this month on the 22nd. And then next month, actually, oh, I have it on here twice, that's why. Forgive me. SMU Lab Day, the amended date is April 19th. Please ignore April 26th. And then next month we'll have a new professor visiting us from UT Arlington, who's one of the new archaeology professors there, Dr. Kelsey Hansen, will be our presenter next month. A little bit farther ahead, but we want to get this on people's calendars. Jen Fricks has reminded us of the very exciting DAS summer camp is coming up in Weatherford. And we have a myriad of things we do for the kids. You know, we're gonna need supervisors, we're gonna need people to set up, kind of interact with some of the more teaching level stuff. Even I think we have the corn grinding set up as well. So if you want to do some facet of that, please reach out to Jen. It's definitely an all hands on deck sort of thing, but we've done it before and I hear it's actually quite a good time. So with business out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speaker for our March meeting. Jenny McWilliams is a friend of mine. I met her at TAS Field School a while back. She was doing one of the very groovy workshops they offer regarding cemeteries. And she works at the Texas Historical Commission in the Historics Division as a cemetery coordinator, programs coordinator. So she is very much our go-to expert here in the state regarding cemetery preservation. There's a whole myriad of responsibilities that's part of her role, but what she's offering and what she offers us tonight is sort of a more archaeological lens towards cemetery preservation, and the components that make up cemeteries and sort of a historic aspect. So I'm going to give the floor over to Jenny. I'm gonna stop sharing and let her share with you her talk tonight.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks to North Texas Archaeological Society for hosting me tonight. Just give me a minute to figure this whole thing out and we'll get started. All right. Alex, can you see my notes?
Only for a second. It switched back. Try hitting share again.
Share again.
Good see. We can see her note. She just needs to start the edit. Yeah.
All right, looks good there, Jenny. Don't change anything.
We're good?
We're good.
You don't see my cheat sheet?
You're
No.
safe. Yeah, go ahead and start your talk. Thank you.
All right. For those of you who don't know me already, I'm a cultural anthropologist. That's what I call myself. And I spend about half of my career in the field as an archaeologist, primarily working for Pruitt and Associates on Caddo and historic sites in Northeast Texas. As opportunities arose, I worked in cemeteries, either recording extant features above ground or removing graves for reburial elsewhere. However, my earlier background is in plants. My father is a botanist who studies native Texas plants and has studied cultural plants. So in his 1965 dissertation, he focused on amaranth germination. And some of us know, yeah, Leslie Bush, some of us know that amaranth was used by the Native Americans. And so he was interested in the spread of this plant by the Native Americans. So the merging of culture and plants is a natural combination for me. And in 2017, Tim Pertola helped me publish 2 articles in NTAS. One was called Plants as Artifacts, and the second was called Cemetery Plants. And this presentation evolved from those 2 articles. This drawing is made by my sister of the backyard house that we grew up in College Station. It was built in 1962 and it was landscaped by the previous owner. Plants that were popular at the time were carefully chosen and placed along winding gravel pathways. Plants primarily imported from Asia were very popular at that time, like dwarf nandina, pittosporum, red-tip photinia, boxwood, loquat, Indian hawthorn, and ligustrum. All of these plants represented a trend towards an exotic Asian cultivars that created a tropical feel and a time capsule of popularity. And ironically, all of these are the same plants that we consider invasive today. While working for Pruitt and Associates in Northeast Texas, even the untrained eye could recognize historic home sites by the daffodils or other bulbs. Some of the crew members might also recognize an especially large specimen of cedar, mimosa, or a grapevine or flowering bushes that were out of context. Later, I'd invite my father to visit archaeological sites where I was working, and he could identify plants that were slightly either out of their range, like the Native Americans had utilized, like an example of a isolated basswood tree found near McGuire's Garden site, which is a Caddo site in Freestone County. This specimen was found along the western edge of its natural range, and the strong, fibrous bark of the basswood was used by Native Americans, much like rope. Later, at the Ware Plantation site in Russ County, where no structures remained, Ligustrum sinensis was observed, and it had been planted in a neat row that may have indicated a lane, a fence line, or the edge of a yard. So I began to pay more attention to the vegetation around the historic sites and started to think about plants as artifacts. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about plants in archaeological sites, artifact typologies, and how plants might be used as an artifact source, resources for the study of historic cultivars, including cemeteries, and challenges of plants as artifacts. Searching in archaeological reports, I found examples of intentional plantings described in site forms, and here are a few excerpts. The site was defined by surface indications, shovel tests, and the distribution of ornamental flowers. Second example, trees defined the house site, and scattered ornamental flowers were also noted. Another example, scattered ornamental plants and shade trees define the parcel. 8 shovel tests were excavated, but only 2 were positive with historic artifacts. And then finally, a low rectangular brick and concrete feature may represent footing for a planter, and patchy ornamental plants in another part of the site were observed. No other indications of a house, such as a chimney pile or footing stones, well or privy, were identified. So in these cases, it's sometimes the plants help define the shape of the site, the extent of the site, and sometimes they are the only thing left of an archaeological site. One of my favorite descriptions is from a cemetery that was heavily vegetated thicket area that likely concealed some unmarked graves, and was described as containing old cedar trees and scattered feral ornamental plants. And I love that idea of feral plants. Here we see an example of a massive planting of daffodils. This is Miss Helen Lee's daffodil garden near Gladewater, where 816 acres of daffodils were planted. Miss Helen ordered a box of daffodils from Holland, and she got a box car. It's a great place to drive through if you're in the area on a rainy day or something and you just want to get away. That's how I ended up going, and it's just kind of a hilarious place to be covered in this many daffodils. So obviously, I'm speaking to the choir here, but archaeologists type artifacts by their material, obviously glass, metal, ceramics, and each artifact in the assemblage is used to build a case for the use or function of the site, and each artifact contributes to forming a date of the occupation of the site. Technology and manufacturing play a heavy role in the dating of artifacts. Wrought iron nails were introduced to Texas by the French and Spanish. Later, technology allowed the introduction of wire nails, where the head of the nail was welded to the top of a thick wire. And then at the turn of the century, we begin to see the modern machine-made nails. Similar changes can be seen in how bottle glass was manufactured, and we use these to date sites. Window glass thickness was used to date improvements to the Levi Jordan home in Brazoria, where first only small panes were successfully manufactured and transported via ships and wagons. Later, technology improved, allowing larger panes to be manufactured, and shipping routes were improved, so larger panes could be utilized in structures if you could afford them. And these are examples of the basic premise of material culture, an economic equation of use, availability, technology, transportation, affordability, and popularity. Dr. Kenneth Hefferty, please forgive me if I'm saying that wrong, introduced me to the idea of dating headstones by the availability and popularity of materials. Hefferty's 2016 book, The Material Culture of German Texans, discusses the use of the Texas star and the rose as symbols of state pride. Early Germans used local limestone, which they could carve, cut, and engrave. This example is one of my favorites. It's from D'Hanis, a cemetery in D'Hanis, Texas. And the top is the German symbol for faith, hope, and charity, representing this person's life in the old world, blended with their new life in Texas, the symbol of the Texas star and the rose, possibly the yellow rose of Texas. Later, with the availability of pink granite, primarily due to the construction of our current state capitol building, smaller size pieces of pink granite became available across the state. And these stones, we finally had the technology to cut these stones, and craftsmen could work these harder stones like granite. At that time, many German families chose pink as their marker types, again, showing their pride with associated with the capital of Texas. And still later, headstones became more widely available through catalogs. And then the last example, obviously technology was necessary to alter the colors of ink found in transferware dishes that were popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. Dark blue was available in Texas about 1815. The inks for black and purple were created later, then reds and browns, and finally green by about 1845. And I saw this graph of transferware, and I thought that this could be applied to cultivars, such as crepe myrtles, bulbs, and bushes. So why can't cultivars be used to date archaeological sites? So I started compiling introduction dates of crepe myrtles from the USDA and from the National Arboretum for plant introductions. And I came up with 353 named cultivars of crepe myrtle with introduction dates ranging from 1825 to 2014. I want to introduce you to a little bit of vocabulary here. This is all a learning curve also for me, but we hear the word plant variety. That's a naturally occurring variation within a species. The word cultivar was coined by Liberty Hyde Bailey in 1923 and is defined as a plant or grouping of plants selected for a desirable characteristic that can be maintained by propagation. According to the International Code of Nomenclature, a cultivar is an assemblage of plants that A, has been selected for a particular characteristic or combination of characteristics, is distinct and uniform and stable in those characteristics, and when propagated by appropriate means, retains those characteristics. Popular cultivars that we've seen introduced in our lifetime are the absurdly popular knockout rose, and edible examples like the 1015 onion, Texas A&M's maroon carrot and maroon bluebonnet, anything maroon, and stone fruit hybrids such as plums, apricots, and nectarines that we see in grocery stores now. The pluot and aprium are some examples of those. So just as artifacts are dated and these dates are published, we can find references to the dates of cultivated plants in plant publications, seed catalogs, And cemeteries can actually be really useful in determining availability and trends of these plants. Rose cultivars are very well dated. Almost every publication on roses provides dates of introduction. A great resource for roses in Texas is the collections by the volunteers of the Texas Rose Rustlers, who collected antique rose cultivars from old homes and cemeteries, and they're now sold at the Antique Rose Emporium in Independence, Texas, near Washington on the Brazos. A few printed materials contain other cultivar dates, but some, for example, Bill Welch's and Greg Grant's heirloom gardening of Texas, heirloom gardening in the South are specifically geared toward historic period plantings. And Julie Ryan's perennial gardens for Texas also provides a few dates and generalizations that compare older to newer cultivars. And then I have also specifically collected historic plant books that provide dates for various bulbs, for example. Other resources are historic seed catalogs, as I mentioned before, the USDA and National Arboretum, and local gardening club yearbooks provide really great dates for the popularity of certain plants in various areas when these plants were coming in. Historic accounts are another great resource. At the Levi Jordan Plantation in Brazoria County, a diary written by Jordan's granddaughter, Sally McNeil, mentions plants in the yard and the surrounding areas. She noted both native and ornamentals on the plantation property. She mentioned grapes, pecans, mimosas, willow trees along the bayou, sugarcane fields, and dense cottonweed, which is probably an amaranth or pigweed. And here we have Maddie Carter smelling a South American import in the yard of the Levi Jordan home, and this is the cockspur coral tree. And I don't know when this was planted, but fairly recently. Historic plantings and cemeteries go hand in hand. The popularity of plant-related words and cemetery names goes to show this. Over 600 cemetery names in Texas include the word oak. Other popular names in cemetery names are pine, rose, evergreen, olive, hickory, and myrtle. In this case, myrtle is probably not the crepe myrtle. It's referencing a native southern wax myrtle. And cemeteries are a great place to study history and the fashion trends because they provide all of the aspects of other archaeological sites: availability, affordability, technology, transportation, and trends within a certain cultural group. Terry Jordan's book, Texas Graveyards, is a great resource. He was a cultural anthropologist who worked at the University of North Texas and eventually retired to UT Austin. And he had his students go out at spring break and collect information on cemeteries across the state. And within those reports, we have photographs, we have descriptions of what these cemeteries looked like at one point in time. I would love to do Texas Graveyards Revisited, to go back to each of those places and see what has changed since those students were there in the late 70s. Bulbs are perhaps the most popular cemetery flower, likely due to their hardiness. Daffodils, jonquils, and narcissus, which were named the daffodils are named for St. David, or the Feast of St. David that occurs on March 1st. And by the way, the paper white narcissus are blooming here in Austin right now. Julie Ryan notes that older cultivars of narcissus are longer lived than the newer varieties. So I find that very interesting that they really were meant for hardiness, those older types. Amaryllis and crinum are extremely hardy and apparently can live over 100 years. They often have offspring, and you can see in this bottom right picture where they're just clumping and crowding this grave. There are certain varieties of crinums. One of them is called milk and wine, and it was hybridized or invented in 1819. Another one is called royal white. And it's been in the US since 1873, but it was recorded in catalogs in Fresno, California in the 1930s, according to Julie Ryan. So we do have some dates for these, and I think if we wanted to, we could create a great collection of plant dates, cultivar dates. Rain lily, schoolhouse lily or oxblood lily, spider lilies, these are all very common in cemeteries. They're native to Argentina, and these bulbs were commonly sold in nurseries and catalogs near the turn of the century. I've got them in my yard. I think they were very, very popular, and again, hardy, but they're not really that widely sold today. In my research, I focused on a particular nursery here in Austin called Ramsey's Nursery. He had originally come from Burnett and moved to Austin to sell his plants. His father was a fruit tree salesman. And through these catalogs, we have actual, listings of what was being sold, what was available, and what was being sold at that time. One thing to note about rain lilies is that even though their blooms are rarely short-lived, their leaves, their foliage, can be seen any time of year. And so that's the same with iris and some of the other hardy bulbs that we can find at historic sites. So we don't always get to choose when we're at an archaeological site, and we don't get to see them bloom, but bulbs can be really, really handy. Iris, also very hardy, and they require very little care. They're very popular in cemeteries, possibly due to their symbolism. They may represent palm fronds, protective daggers, or possibly the Nile reeds that hid the infant Moses. There's a lot of biblical references to the plants that are found in cemeteries. And the iris can come in German or bearded iris, Dutch iris, Siberian, Japanese, and Louisiana iris. So there's a lot of different types. Popular cemetery trees include evergreens such as cedar and arborvitae, Italian cypress, and then non-conifer evergreens such as holly. And here's an example from Ramsey's nursery where he's listing the flowering shrubs that he has available and the colors that the crepe myrtles came in, much like transferware. Mimosas, oleanders, boxwood was really popular. It was even in colonial Williamsburg. And then we also have camellias, azaleas, rhododendron, which were imported from Asia to England and then to the southeastern plantations in the 1830s and then being brought into Texas. This is an example of a gardenia that was found in Navasota, Texas. It's found outside of its range, and it suggests that this person is, the family of this person is likely caring for this particular, these plants, somehow giving them probably extra water, maybe even fertilizer. Spirea are very popular in cemeteries, especially around the turn of the century to about the 1920s or 30s. Julie Ryan notes that the old-fashioned spireas can grow gangly and reach 6 feet tall and almost twice as wide. However, the newer hybrids tend to be somewhat smaller, ranging from only 3 to 5 feet. So just telling you these examples that even though we might not be able to get to the exact date of something was planted, there are trends in older versus newer cultivars. Yuccas and other prickly plants have been used in cemeteries to keep this, especially African American cemeteries, to keep the spirits either in the cemetery or protect the dead. The Gullah of Western and Central Africa believed that the spiny plants restricted the movements of the spirits. And I have found yucca in cascading down hill slopes in a cemetery in of enslaved people in Hayes County, where there really wasn't much other information about the size of the cemetery. These yucca were sprawling around. Ground covers such as vinca or periwinkle were covered the Veracruz burial ground, also in Hayes County, where only one formal marker was found, and this is Tiffany Osborne's foot pointing to a field stone. That's one of about 70 field stones that marked graves. Without knowing that the vinca was probably planted there for a cemetery, I'm not sure we would have ever found that one single formal grave marker. Vinca also identified a lost cemetery in Williamson County that's being worked on right now. It was a cemetery vicinity, so we didn't know exactly where it was, but one of the first things I noticed when I saw the pictures were the vinca. And I said, I think you're in the right spot. They later found headstone fragments in push piles. Vinca can be a little tricky though, because it can creep. It likes shadier areas, especially in very hot areas. At the Brown Cemetery that the TAS Archaeological Field School students helped me with, we saw vinca where it only survived under the remaining trees at the back of the cemetery. Another very unfortunate common ground cover is St. Augustine grass. We don't think about it. It's just so common to us now, but St. Augustine became popular in the 1950s, and cemeteries that were once sort of prairie settings, rural settings, were basically stripped down and had St. Augustine planted. So we lost a lot of our cultural plantings that way. And finally, there are limitations to studying plants in historic sites. As I mentioned earlier, spring is the best time to see the flowers in bloom, and as archaeologists, we don't always get to choose when we have the opportunity to go to a site. But if you do have the opportunity to go back in the spring, you may see what's blooming and learn another artifact to add to your list. We also have to take into account the means of propagation, as I was talking about the sprawling or creeping of the vinca. How are the seeds spread? How does the plant grow from root shoots? Or are the seeds dispersed by wind or by birds? At a cemetery, an African American cemetery in near the Brazoria Burleson County line, my father and I found an early example of a crepe myrtle cultivar. And there the sprouts, the root sprouts were coming up just so thick and dense, just a thicket of crepe myrtle, where later grave shafts had cut the roots of the older plants. And unlike other artifact types, plants are restricted to either mass regions or micro regions. They depend on weather trends, both freezing and drought can kill off our artifact type. And so we have to pay attention to where these hardy plants can actually survive. Similarly, droughts, you know, the fires that are going to burn up our artifact type. We don't usually have that in the metal and ceramics and glass categories. Cemetery plants are also victim of unintentional destruction, cemetery cleanup efforts by uninformed people with very good intentions, may remove plants, may use herbicides to kill plants, and also that herbicide is degrading the headstone, so that's a no-no from the preservation point of view. And then a lot of cemeteries have rules and regulations about what can be planted. In this particular case, no planting of vines, trees, and shrubs. So we're just missing that artifact type because of these rules. But cemeteries can provide local confirmation of dates and use of different cultivars. And it was a fun challenge for me and my dad to walk into a cemetery. I would point at a tree like this magnolia, and I'd say, when was this magnolia planted? And he would come up with it, usually within 5 or 10 years. In this particular case, this magnolia tree was planted as a vegetational offering, and the headstone is dated to 1940. Sort of moving on from this topic, I just wanted to kind of give props to somebody. Her name is Dr. Alicia Odewall, and she is at the University of Houston, and she is studying heritage trees, specifically African American or Black heritage trees. She gave a presentation at the SHA's, the Society for Historic Archaeology meetings earlier this year. It was called Blood at the Roots, Heritage Trees and the Silent Witness to the Past. This is a quote from an article about her work. It says, the landscapes of Black heritage, often erased from mainstream historic narratives. Dr. Oldewall searches Black towns and freedom colonies lost to time, whether burned down, abandoned, or systematically erased. The Black Heritage Tree Project is dedicated to documenting and mapping spirit trees that have silently witnessed centuries of Black history. And this effort entwines both environmental conservation and ancestral remembrance, ensuring that these sacred markers of Black heritage are preserved for future generations. She defines Black heritage trees as a fixed point in a historic landscape that is associated with cultural significance, that stood witness to an important moment in Black history. It's rooted in soil modified by Black people or intentionally planted by Black people, and the use of the bark, roots, or branches tell a story. She brought up examples from the Tulsa race riots. Another speaker in the same symposium showed examples of trees that had grown around where a home had been burned. And I have an example of such a tree at the McWilliams farmstead, located on the Travis Hayes County line, where a huge oak tree was in the front yard of the home. And in that tree lived a hive of bees. And you could see on the inside where the tree had sort of been hollowed out, hatchet marks where they were reaching in to grab the honey from the inside of the tree. That site also had persimmon, black persimmon, and these are just other examples of some of the plants that could be included as basically either artifacts. In the case of the honey, that tree is a feature. That is all I have in the way of the slideshow. I'm going to figure out how to stop sharing and see if there's any discussion or questions.
Any questions in the room for Jenny? Do we have any online?
I haven't seen any pop up. Nope.
No questions. No, that's outstanding.
I like questions.
Wait, we have one in the room, actually, she can hear you, so.
Okay. You had mentioned a tree that you and your dad saw, the magnolia, and said that it was I think a ceremonial planting, or I forget what the word was that you used, and that he estimated its age, but that you were able to kind of date it to 1940. Was that dating, was that using, I guess, like scientific techniques? Or did you get that date from like graveyard records?
Just from the headstone itself.
Oh, okay.
And not everybody is that skilled at it. It's just sort of his little trick game.
Thank you.
Questions from in the room? Jenny, that was lovely. Very informative. Actually, you had me taking some notes and slide photos on the spot. From the perspective of an archaeologist who inadvertently sometimes stumbles on these things, it's good information to have for professionals and non-professionals alike. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Yeah, I think we all learned a little something today. Brett says hi. So yeah, thanks again. And
Thanks, y'all.
yeah.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.
A little bit of a shorter meeting today, but nonetheless, lovely. Thank you all who attended here in person and those of you who attended on Zoom tonight. It was a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you all next time on April 10th for our next meeting. I'm gonna stop recording, but with that, everyone have a wonderful evening. I'll see you next time. Thanks again, Jenny.